The Galactic Council mocked humanity as cowards until the human fleets arrived. Part 1: The Weight of Empty Chairs. The laughter started before I even finished my sentence. I had been speaking for less than 30 seconds, a calm, measured response to the Vreth Dominion's formal accusation, when the sound rippled through the chamber like a wave. It was not the polite, restrained kind of laughter that diplomats sometimes use to deflect an awkward moment. It was the open, unashamed kind. The kind that says, "We do not consider you worth the effort of pretending." I stopped speaking. I stood at the human delegation's podium, a narrow, pale structure near the rear left of the Grand Conclave floor, and I let the sound wash over me. 47 species, represented by their finest minds, their sharpest voices, their most decorated ambassadors, and every single one of them was either laughing or smiling in a way that meant the same thing. My name is Kale Marin. I have held the title of Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 11 years. Before that, I spent 22 years in the Martian Defense Corps, where I learned, among other things, that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation is not when the other side raises its weapon. It is when they stop taking you seriously. I waited for the laughter to settle. The Grand Conclave chamber was enormous by any standard, a hollowed sphere carved directly into the rock of asteroid Primus, an ancient way station sitting at the gravitational midpoint between 4 major star systems. The walls curved inward above us and were lined with observation galleries, each one filled with delegation staff, analysts, and junior attachés watching the proceedings in real time. The floor was a wide, circular platform of polished dark stone, ringed by delegation podiums arranged in a precise horseshoe. At the open end of that horseshoe sat the council chair, a tall, silver-framed seat occupied by First Speaker Orvin of the Lethian Collective, a calm and ancient being who had been moderating galactic disputes for longer than most of humanity's written history. The human podium was near the back. It had always been near the back. Councillor Ithari of the Vreth Dominion stood at the primary speaker's position, the elevated central dais reserved for whoever held the floor. He was tall and angular, with a long, pale face and 4 arms that he kept folded across his chest, in a posture that I had come to recognize as Vreth for dismissal. He had just finished presenting what he called an evidence package, a detailed record of human military conduct over the past 18 months, specifically our response to the Outer Fringe raids. The raids had been bold. 3 human border systems, Cassini Station, the Helios Outpost, and the civilian agricultural colony on Dren IV, had been struck in rapid succession by Vreth-aligned raider fleets. Cargo seized. Infrastructure damaged. 2 people injured, none fatally, because our evacuation protocols had activated within minutes. And then, rather than launching a counterstrike, the human fleet stationed in the region had executed a full tactical withdrawal. Clean, orderly, and complete. The Council had noted it. The galaxy had noted it. And now Ithari was making sure that everyone noted it one more time, with added commentary. "The human response," he said, his translator rendering his voice into crisp, clipped words, consisted of what their own military command described as a strategic redeployment. 3 systems were struck. Human assets retreated. No counter-engagement was attempted. No retaliation was mounted. He let the silence sit for a moment. "I submit to this council that humanity's continued presence as a recognized interstellar power is, at this point, a matter of tradition rather than fact. They are a species that calculates survival over principle. They are merchants who wear the titles of soldiers. They are," and here he paused, and in that pause I could hear the performance of it, the deliberate theatricality, "cowards." The laughter came then. I had been watching Ithari's face through the whole speech, and I had known it was coming. That single word, cowards, was not an accident. It was a choice. A public, recorded, translated choice, entered into the official proceedings of the Galactic Council. He wanted it on the record. He wanted every delegation, every junior analyst in every observation gallery, every species monitoring the council feed from their home systems, to hear a representative of the Vreth Dominion call humanity cowards and hear nothing forceful come back. When the laughter faded, first speaker Orvin gestured toward the human podium with 2 fingers, the standard invitation to respond. I walked to the dais slowly, not because I was nervous, because I have found over 11 years of diplomacy that the pace at which you move toward a podium tells the room a great deal about how much you feel you need to rush. I did not feel I needed to rush. I adjusted the speaker's microphone. I looked out at 47 delegations. I looked at Ithari, who had returned to his seat and was already engaged in a quiet side conversation with his attaché, as though my response was too predictable to bother waiting for. I said, "We noted the incursion." 5 words. That was my entire response. I let them sit in the air for a moment, then I returned to my seat. The laughter that followed was louder than the first round. Someone in the Vreth gallery made a sound that their species uses the way humans use a dismissive wave. The Lethian delegation, typically among the more reserved presences in the chamber, exchanged a glance that I read as something between pity and amusement. Even first speaker Orvin, to his credit, kept his expression neutral, though I noticed he did not intervene. I sat down, folded my hands on the table in front of me, and kept my face completely still. My attaché, a young man named Owen Price who had been with the mission for 2 years and was still learning when to speak and when not to, leaned toward me with wide eyes. He whispered, "That's it. That's all we're saying." I did not look at him. I said very quietly, "That's all they need to hear." He did not understand. I did not expect him to, not yet. What Owen did not know, what no one in that chamber knew except for me, was that I had read the mobilization orders 4 months ago. I had sat in a secure briefing room on Ganymede Station with 3 members of Earth's Joint Strategic Command, and I had been walked through a plan so precise, so carefully constructed, so deeply patient in its design, that it had taken me a full day afterward before I could speak about it without my hands trembling. Not from fear, from something else entirely. From recognition. I had served long enough and fought enough to know what a real trap looks like. Not the quick, reactive kind, the kind where you respond to a provocation with an equal provocation and both sides walk away hurt. The real kind, the slow kind, the kind that requires you to absorb humiliation as a cost of doing business, to let the other side read your silence as weakness, to give them every reason to push further, exactly as far as you need them to push. The withdrawal from the outer fringe had not been a retreat, it had been an invitation. And seated in the grand conclave chamber, surrounded by 47 species who believed with complete confidence that humanity was afraid, I allowed myself exactly one private thought before turning my attention back to the proceedings. They will understand soon enough. The session continued for another 3 hours. Various delegations weighed in on the Vreth evidence package. The consensus, politely worded but unmistakable, was that humanity's standing in the council had been damaged. The Lethian collective's representative suggested, gently, that perhaps Earth should consider a more assertive posture to maintain its credibility. The Andral Federation, small, careful, always reading the political winds, abstained from the discussion entirely. The Vreth sat with the self-satisfied stillness of people who had already won the day and knew it. When the session ended, I walked out through the wide corridor of Asteroid Primus's main concourse and found a window, a long, rectangular viewport looking out into open space, and I stood there for a while, watching the stars. Owen came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a moment, which I appreciated. Then he said, "They really don't like us, do they?" It was not quite a question. "Some of them don't," I said. "Some of them are simply reading a ledger and coming to what they believe is a rational conclusion. Ithari is neither. He's pushing. He's testing how far we'll absorb before we react. And we're just going to keep absorbing." I turned away from the window. Owen, I said, do you know what the most expensive thing in any conflict is? He thought about it. Firepower. Time, I said. The side that can afford to spend more of it wins. We have been spending time very carefully for a very long while. I started walking. Make sure the next session report is filed before midnight, and get some rest. The days ahead are going to require you to be sharp. I left him standing at the window, looking at the stars, and I walked back toward the human mission's quarters with the particular calm of a man who knows something the rest of the room does not. It is a strange kind of feeling, heavy and clean and very, very quiet. Part 2. What Cowards Do in the Dark. The Council's formal censure of Earth arrived 6 weeks after that first session, and it was, by any diplomatic standard, a thorough document. 17 pages, signed by 31 of the 47 recognized member species. It cited humanity's failure to respond to the outer fringe raids as a violation of what the Council called the doctrine of proportional engagement, an informal but widely observed principle that stated any recognized interstellar power had both the right and the implied obligation to defend its territories against unlawful aggression. By withdrawing our fleets, the document argued, we had not only abandoned our own people, but had also signaled to the broader galactic community that human-controlled space was, in practical terms, undefended. The language was careful, diplomatic, but the meaning underneath it was not subtle. My government's response arrived on my desk the following morning. It was 4 sentences long. Earth acknowledges receipt of the Council's formal censure. We take note of the concerns raised by member species. Earth remains committed to the principles of galactic peace and cooperative governance. We will continue to act in accordance with our strategic assessments. That was it. 4 sentences, no denial, no protest, no demand for retraction. I read it twice, then forwarded it to First Speaker Orvin's office without comment. By the end of that week, the consensus in the Council corridors, among the analysts, the attachés, the junior diplomats who did the real work of keeping track of political weather, was that Earth had accepted the censure because we had no credible counterargument. We were, the theory went, trying to avoid further embarrassment by saying as little as possible. I let the theory breathe. I even quietly encouraged it in the way that experienced diplomats do, not through outright deception, but through the careful management of silence. When other ambassadors raised the matter in informal settings, I responded with polite brevity. When the Council's communications office asked if Earth intended to file a formal rebuttal, Owen, following my exact instructions, told them we were reviewing our options. We were not reviewing our options. Earth Command had already made its choices. I was simply maintaining the space those choices needed to work inside. It was during those weeks that I came to know Nora Ellis. She was the Vreth Dominion's cultural attaché, a position that officially involved managing the translation archives and coordinating cross-species educational exchanges. In practice, Nora had somehow ended up in this role because she was, by the standards of her species, unusually curious about other cultures. She was young for her position, with the precise, careful movements typical of Vreth diplomatic staff, but she had a way of asking questions that was less political and more genuinely interested. She found me one afternoon in the Primus Concourse reading room, a quiet space that most delegations avoided because the seats were designed for species with more legs than humans, and sat down across from me with a cup of something warm and said, without preamble, I want to understand something. I lowered the report I was reading. Go ahead. Why didn't you respond? Not the political answer, the real one. I looked at her for a moment. She was serious. There was no trick in the question. I had been reading people for a long time, and Nora did not have the face of someone laying a diplomatic trap. She was just asking. Tell me something first, I said. Have you ever watched a spider build a web? She tilted her head. I've seen the concept in the xenobiology archives. The spider doesn't chase its food, I said. It builds something and it waits, and the waiting is not passivity. The waiting is the strategy. Every thread is placed exactly where it needs to be, and when something flies into that web, the spider does not need to run after it. The work is already done. Nora considered that. You're saying the withdrawal was intentional. I'm saying, I answered carefully, that humanity does not make unintentional decisions at the strategic level. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, the council thinks you were afraid. I know. And you don't want to correct them. I picked my report back up. Not yet. She left shortly after, and I watched her go with the quiet assessment of someone who had just decided to trust a particular person slightly more than the usual baseline. Nora was sharp. Sharper than her official role suggested. That could be useful, or it could be a complication. In my experience, those two things were often the same. It was around that time that the intelligence reports started filtering through the Council's shared network, the kind of information that circulates between member species monitoring services without being formally presented in session. Someone, or several someones, had noticed that 3 of Earth's major deep space manufacturing platforms had gone dark. No emissions, no subspace traffic, no scheduled maintenance windows, just silence. The interpretation that spread through council circles was swift and confident. Earth's industrial sector was contracting. The economic strain of maintaining a galactic diplomatic presence without the military credibility to back it was beginning to show. Some analysts suggested we might be approaching the early stages of voluntary withdrawal from council membership. I read these reports in my quarters each morning with a cup of coffee, and allowed myself the small pleasure of recognizing how thoroughly wrong they were. I had been on Ganymede Station when the blackout order was issued. I had heard Admiral Claire Voss explain it in the measured, unhurried tone she used when discussing things that had been decided long before the meeting began. The manufacturing platforms had not gone dark because they were shutting down. They had gone dark because they were running at full capacity, triple shifts, rotating crews, zero emissions except through shielded venting channels that our own early warning systems could barely detect at close range. Someone trying to read us from light years away would see nothing, which was exactly what we needed them to see. I had known Claire Voss since my core days. She was not a person who built small things. I remember the night I received her briefing clearly, not because of anything dramatic that happened afterward, but because of one image that stayed with me, a holographic projection of deep space scattered with blue marker points, each one representing a position, a way station, a gravitational staging point. And across those marker points, moving like a slow tide across the display, were green lines, fleet vectors, converging. Not around our systems, around theirs. I had looked at that display for a long time before I said anything. When I finally spoke, I asked only one question: how long? Claire had answered without hesitation. When they move, 6 hours. The moment they commit their full advance, 6 hours from the order, we're in position. And if they don't move? They'll move, she said. We've given them every reason to believe there's nothing in the way. That was the briefing. That was the plan. And every morning for the weeks that followed, as I sat in council sessions and read diplomatic communiques and fielded polite expressions of sympathy from ambassadors who thought humanity was quietly declining, I carried that image in my memory, those green lines, moving slowly and with perfect certainty toward their marks. One night very late, Owen knocked on my office door. I told him to come in. He looked tired and a little unsettled. He sat down across from my desk and said, "I got an encrypted message from Earth Command. It was addressed to you through the secondary channel, just 2 words." He held out a data card. I took it and read the screen. Patience, Ambassador. I set the card down on my desk. I opened the bottom drawer, retrieved a bottle of scotch that a friend from Edinburgh had sent me the previous year, poured a measure into a plain glass, and sat back in my chair. Owen watched me with an expression that was somewhere between concern and curiosity. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Go to sleep. And when you wake up, remember that in 11 years of this work, the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered in any negotiation is the moment when the other party becomes absolutely certain they understand the situation." He thought about that, because that's when they stop looking. "Because that's when they stop looking," I confirmed. He left. I sat with my drink and the low hum of the station's environmental systems for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. Outside the viewport, stars drifted past on their long, indifferent courses. Somewhere out there, in the dark between those stars, human engineers on blacked-out platforms were working through the night. Human fleet commanders were running final system checks. Human navigators were plotting coordinates with the kind of careful precision that only comes from knowing exactly where you need to be and exactly when you need to be there. Nobody in the Galactic Council knew any of it. I finished my drink, turned off the light, and went to bed. Part 3: The Silence Before the Signal. The emergency session was called on a Tuesday. I received the notification at 600, while I was still in the middle of my morning review of the overnight intelligence summaries. The message from First Speaker Orvin's office was brief. "Council convenes at 900, full attendance mandatory, matter of galactic security," and I read it twice before setting my coffee down. I already knew what had happened. The Vreth advance into the Kepler corridor had begun overnight. The Kepler corridor was a stretch of space roughly 40 light-years long and 12 wide, sitting at the intersection of 3 major trade routes. It connected the inner council systems to the outer colonies, and whoever controlled transit through it held a quiet but enormous amount of economic leverage over roughly a third of all recognized interstellar commerce. The Vreth had wanted it for decades. Every diplomatic analyst in the council knew it. The corridor had been the subject of 11 formal negotiation attempts, 6 boundary reviews, and 3 near incidents over the past 30 years. And every time, a combination of council pressure and strategic ambiguity had kept the Vreth from making a direct claim. The strategic ambiguity, in large part, had come from the fact that several human shipping lanes ran through the corridor. Humanity, with our acknowledged, if now apparently doubted military capability, had served as an informal deterrent simply by being present. But we had just spent 6 weeks being publicly described as cowards. We had accepted a formal censure without argument. Our manufacturing platforms had gone dark. Our fleets had withdrawn from the outer fringe. From where Ithari and the Vreth High Command were standing, the timing was perfect. I walked to the conclave chamber at 8:55, 4 minutes ahead of session start. The corridor leading to the main floor was unusually crowded, delegations moving quickly, staff speaking in urgent tones, the particular energy of a building that has just received news and has not yet decided how to feel about it. I moved through it all at my usual pace. Owen fell into step beside me. His face was tight. The Vreth have moved 6 full divisions into the Kepler approach vectors. 3 of them are already inside the outer boundary markers. "I know," I said. "They're calling it a peacekeeping deployment." "I know that too." He lowered his voice. "What do we do?" I pushed open the heavy door to the conclave floor and stepped inside. The chamber was already nearly full. The noise level was higher than I had ever heard in 11 years of sessions, overlapping voices, the hum of translation systems running at capacity, the specific kind of controlled alarm that fills a room full of intelligent beings who have just realized that the rules they counted on may not be enough. I scanned the floor as I walked to the human podium. 3 delegations were already on their feet. The Andral Federation's ambassador was speaking rapidly into a personal communicator. The Lethian collective's first voice sat with the deep stillness of her species. but even she was watching the central floor display with more attention than I had seen from her before. The display showed a galactic map. The Kepler corridor was marked in pale yellow. The 6 Vreth fleet groupings were marked in sharp red, moving slowly across the display with the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from believing you have already calculated every response and found none of them threatening. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I waited. First speaker Orvin called the session to order at 9:02, which was the first time in my experience that he had been even 2 minutes late to open a scheduled session. He moved through the formalities quickly, which told me that even Orvin's patience had limits when approximately 1/3 of galactic trade infrastructure was being physically occupied. Ithari took the speaker's position before the floor was formally open to delegations. Orvin allowed it, a small concession, I noted, to the Vreth's current position of advantage. Ithari's speech was measured, confident, and carefully constructed. The Vreth deployment, he explained, was a response to escalating security concerns in the Kepler region. Several vessels of unknown registry had been operating in the corridor without authorization. The Vreth Dominion, as a major stakeholder in regional stability, had exercised its right to protect the safety of its commercial interests. The divisions would remain in position only as long as necessary to ensure the situation was resolved. The Vreth Dominion had the deepest respect for the Council's processes and would cooperate fully with any formal review. 3 delegations immediately requested the floor. All 3 were species with significant trade volume through the Kepler corridor, and all 3 were, in practical terms, too small to do anything except ask the Council to do something for them. Orvin acknowledged them in order. Each ambassador spoke with varying degrees of alarm and diplomatic restraint. The message underneath all 3 speeches was the same. This is a problem, someone needs to fix it, and that someone is not us. Then Orvin turned toward the human podium. Not to grant me the floor. Not yet. He simply looked at me, the careful, ancient gaze of a being who had watched a very great deal of galactic history unfold in this chamber, and I had the sense that he was reading something in my posture that the rest of the room had not yet thought to look for. Ithari turned too. He did not wait for the formal process. He spoke directly across the floor in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry. And what will humanity do, Ambassador Marin? Perhaps issue a statement, write a letter, or will you perhaps redeploy to a more comfortable distance? He let the last words land carefully. Around him, the allied delegations and several neutral ones laughed, quieter than in the previous session, but present. A habit now, something they had come to expect. I did not respond immediately. I reached into my jacket pocket. I retrieved my personal communicator. I looked at the screen, a single, simple message that had arrived 4 minutes ago, during Ithari's speech, through a channel so secure that it existed, as far as any foreign intelligence service knew, only in theory. The message read, "Fleets are in position, awaiting your word." I looked at the message for exactly 3 seconds. I put the communicator back in my pocket. Then I stood up. I did not go to the speaker's dais. I spoke from where I stood because I did not need the elevation. In 11 years, I had never spoken from the floor during a session. The room registered it. I could see heads turning, conversations stopping. I straightened my jacket. "Ambassador Ithari," I said, and my voice was as calm and level as I could make it. "I recommend that you recall your forward divisions." The room was very quiet now. "All 6, Ithari said, not mockingly. Something in my tone had changed the room, and he had noticed it even if he did not yet understand it. "All 6, I said. "I would strongly recommend beginning the recall within the next 4 minutes." Ithari stared at me. He had the look of a man running a rapid calculation and not finding an answer he recognized. Around him, several of his attachés were exchanging glances. First speaker Orvin said quietly, Ambassador Marin, is there something you wish to formally present to the Council? I turned to look at him. In approximately 4 minutes, I said, the Council will have access to a live broadcast from the Kepler corridor. I believe the transmission will be self-explanatory. The silence in the chamber was extraordinary. 47 delegations, hundreds of staff in the galleries above, and not a single sound except the low background hum of the station's life systems. Then Orvin nodded once. And we waited. Part 4, 400 ships in perfect formation. The main display came alive at 9:41 hours and 14 seconds. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock display in the corner of the chamber's central screen when the feed switched. One moment the galactic map was showing the 6 red markers of the Vreth fleet groups, moving steadily through the Kepler corridor with the unhurried confidence of a force that had already decided the outcome. The next moment, the map was replaced by a direct visual feed from the corridor's long-range monitoring network, and the room that had been silent became something quieter than silence, if such a thing is possible. A kind of collective, held breath that I felt more than heard. The feed showed open space, stars, the faint glow of the Kepler approach lanes. And then one by one, they came out of the dark. The first group emerged from transit about 40,000 kilometers off the Vreth Advance Column's port flank, 7 vessels, running without running lights, their hulls absorbing the ambient starlight rather than reflecting it. Long-range dreadnoughts. The kind we had not built publicly in 20 years. The kind that most Council intelligence assessments had categorized as decommissioned. The second group came out of transit on the starboard side, almost simultaneously. 9 vessels. Then, 15 seconds later, a third group behind the advance column, 12 vessels, spreading into a containment arc with a precision that spoke of hours of choreography. And then the larger formations began to emerge. I watched the display with the rest of the chamber, and I watched their faces. I watched Ithari, who had gone completely still. I watched Nora, seated 3 rows behind the Vreth delegation, whose expression moved through several things in quick succession before settling on something I could not fully name. I watched First Speaker Orvin, who was watching me. Owen, seated to my left, made a sound very low in his throat. He had known something was coming. He had not known it would look like this. I had been in the briefing. I had seen the numbers. But seeing numbers on a holographic display in a secure room on Ganymede is a different experience from watching them materialize on a live feed in the Grand Conclave chamber, vessel by vessel, in full view of the galactic community. By the time the emergent sequence was complete, 412 human vessels were in the Kepler corridor. They were arranged in 4 distinct formations, positioned at the 4 cardinal approach vectors of the Vreth Advance, ahead, behind, left, and right. Not a net exactly, more like a frame. A very precise, very thorough frame from which the 6 Vreth fleet groups had no practical exit that did not require them to move directly toward us. There were no warning shots, no aggressive postures. Our ships simply held position, engines idling, every targeting system powered but not aimed. It was a posture that any trained military mind in the room would recognize instantly. We are here, we see you, and we are waiting to see what you decide. Ithari was on his feet. I could see his 4 arms moving, the Vreth equivalent of rapid, agitated thought. His chief aide leaned close and said something. Ithari shook his head. The Vreth advance columns had stopped moving. First Speaker Orvin spoke carefully. Ambassador Marin, would you care to address the Council? I stood. This time I did walk to the Speaker's dais. I had earned the elevation. What the Council is observing, I said, is the forward element of the Earth Defense Command's Corridor Response Group. These vessels have been in position since approximately 4 days ago, operating under full emissions blackout. They were staged through a series of dark transit points that our navigational teams have been charting for the past 18 months. I paused. The Vreth Dominion moved 6 fleet divisions into the Kepler corridor this morning, citing security concerns. We have been in this corridor longer than they have, and we have considerably more of it covered. Murmuring through the galleries above, I waited for it to settle. I want to be precise about what this is, I continued. This is not a provocation. We have not fired. We will not fire unless fired upon. These are defensive positions, consistent with our right to protect our shipping lanes and the interests of the member species who transit the corridor under Earth's registered agreements. I looked directly at Ithari. We are not asking the Vreth Dominion to surrender. We are asking them to go home. Ithari found his voice. You cannot have staged this many vessels without Council monitoring systems detecting the fleet movements. This is a deception, a deliberate. The vessels were not moved as a fleet, I said. They were moved individually over 18 months using standard shipping registration that your monitoring services cataloged as commercial traffic, cargo haulers, survey vessels, contract transports. I let that sit for a moment. We were very careful about the order in which we filed the transit permits. The murmuring in the galleries became something louder. I heard several distinct sounds from different delegations that their translators rendered approximately as impossible. It was not impossible. It had simply required patience and planning and a willingness to move at a pace so slow that no single data point ever looked like a pattern. A direct channel request came through to the chamber display. The Vreth Advance Commander, Admiral Dithran of the 1st Vreth Battle Group, requesting immediate communication with the human delegation. Orvin looked at me. I nodded. The Admiral's face appeared on the secondary display. He was a broad, controlled figure whose expression told me very clearly that he was working hard to remain exactly that. Ambassador, he said, clarify your intentions. I said, your divisions entered a space in which we have prior legal presence and current military superiority. We are not going to engage you, Admiral. We would like you to withdraw. Your government may send a formal communication to Earth Command requesting a timeline discussion if they need more than 6 hours. Dithran stared at me. You're offering us 6 hours. We're offering you 6 hours, I confirmed. He cut the channel. I turned back to the chamber. Ithari was still standing. I looked at him not with triumph, not with hostility, just steadily. The Vreth Dominion said, I recalled aloud, that humanity calculates survival over principle. That is true. We have always been very careful about survival. I adjusted the speaker's microphone. We have survived things that would have ended most species. Ice ages, world wars. The hard years after our first contact with the galactic community, when we realized how much larger the universe was than we had imagined and how unprepared we were for it. We survived all of those things, and we survived them by being very, very precise about the difference between appearing weak and being weak. I stepped back from the dais. Those are not the same thing, Counselor Ithari. I hope you will convey that to your government. I returned to my seat. In the corridor 3 hours later, Nora found me again. She did not sit down this time. She stood in front of me with her arms crossed, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. Then, you knew the entire time, every session, every censure. You sat there and you knew. Yes, I said. And you said nothing. We said what we needed to say. She looked at me for a long time. The spider, she said. The spider, I agreed. She uncrossed her arms. The expression on her face was still complex, too many things at once to reduce to a single word. But underneath all of it, I thought I could see something that might, given enough time and enough honest conversation, become a kind of respect. The Vreth divisions are withdrawing, she said. All 6 groups. The Admiral submitted the notification to Council monitoring 20 minutes ago. I know, I said. I received the confirmation. Was anyone, she paused, choosing her word carefully, was anyone ever in real danger through all of this? I thought about that honestly. Our people in the 3 outer fringe systems took some damage to their infrastructure. 2 people were hurt in the initial raids. We evacuated everyone in time, but they were still our people in harm's way. I met her eyes. We do not enjoy that part, we never have, but we were very sure of our timing. She nodded slowly, then she said, quietly, I'm going to have to write a report about this. I imagine so. I don't know how to explain it. I thought for a moment. Start with this, I said. Humanity spent 30 years watching the galaxy assume we were the same as everyone else. We are not the same as everyone else. Not because we are stronger or faster or more advanced, but because somewhere in our history we learned a lesson that most species have not had to learn the same way, that the most important resource in any long conflict is not power, it is time, and we are very, very patient people. She left. I watched the corridor empty around me as delegations filed back to their quarters, and I stood there for a moment with the particular feeling of a thing accomplished, not celebratory, not triumphant, but solid, grounded, the way a well-built structure feels when you press your hand against the wall. No shots fired, no ships lost, not a single casualty on either side. The Kepler corridor was open, and the Galactic Council had just learned something about humanity that it would not forget for a very long time. Part 5. What we are when we're not afraid. 3 months passed. 3 months is not a long time in galactic politics, where treaty negotiations often run for decades and formal position changes can take years to filter through the institutional machinery of 47 species. But in the 3 months following the Kepler corridor incident, which the Council's official record designated, with characteristic understatement, as the corridor clarification event, more changed in the structure of galactic diplomacy than I had seen in my entire 11 years at the mission. The first requests came within a week, quiet ones, sent through secondary channels, carefully worded to avoid the appearance of urgency. The Andral Federation, the same delegation that had abstained from every public discussion of human affairs for 3 years, formally requested a meeting with Earth's diplomatic mission to discuss bilateral security arrangements. The Pelhari Compact, a small but strategically positioned alliance of 4 species in the outer systems, sent a longer, more detailed inquiry asking about the terms under which Earth might extend its registered transit agreements to cover their shipping lanes. By the end of the first month, I had 14 pending bilateral meeting requests on my desk. Owen was working 16-hour days and had started keeping a second coffee on his desk at all times. We're going to need more staff, he told me one morning, setting a fresh stack of request documents beside my existing stack. Request them, I said, and copy Earth Command on the staffing proposal. They'll want to see the demand figures. They're going to be pleased. They're going to be very busy, I said, which is different. The council sessions themselves had changed in texture. Not dramatically, the formal processes remained the same, the seating remained the same, the procedural rhythms that had governed the conclave for centuries continued without interruption. But the atmosphere was different in a way that was difficult to point to and easy to feel. Delegations that had previously placed their representatives in positions angled away from the human podium, a small but consistent body language signal that I had learned to read years ago, had adjusted. Eyes held mine for longer. The corridor conversations that I was invited to join had become more substantive. And the laughter, when other species joked among themselves about galactic affairs, no longer had the edge I had been hearing for 3 years. The Vreth Dominion's Counselor Ithari formally requested a private meeting 6 weeks after the corridor incident. I accepted, and we met in one of the small consultation rooms off the main conclave floor, neutral space, no staff, just the 2 of us and a pair of translation units. He was different in private. The performance was gone. Whatever posture he had maintained across months of public sessions, This version of Ithari was a senior diplomat at the end of a plan that had failed, and he was trying to understand why. He sat with two of his arms folded, and the other two resting open on the table, which I had learned was Vreth body language for honest engagement. He studied me for a moment before speaking. "How?" he said, not rudely, just directly. "How what? How did you maintain silence for so long? We have intelligence resources. We had monitoring coverage of your major systems. We saw the manufacturing platforms go dark, and we interpreted it as decline. How did you build that many vessels, stage them across the corridor in groups of 1 and 2 and 3 over 18 months, coordinate a response of that scale, without a single piece of intelligence reaching us?" I considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. "Partly," I said, "it was operational security. Good planning, strict information compartmentalization, technical measures that I am not going to detail in this room." I paused. "But mostly it was something simpler. You were not looking for it. You had formed a conclusion that humanity was declining, was afraid, was strategically passive, and once you formed that conclusion, your monitoring services were collecting data in service of confirming it, not challenging it. You saw manufacturing platforms go dark and assumed contraction, because contraction fit your existing picture of us. You saw our fleet withdraw and assumed fear, because fear fit the narrative you had already built." Ithari was quiet. "We gave you reasons to build that narrative," I continued. "We chose to give you those reasons. The withdrawal, the silent response to the censure, the careful management of our public posture, all of it was designed to feed a conclusion that served our purposes." I folded my hands. "The most effective deception is not a lie. It is a truth that you allow someone to arrive at themselves, pointed in the wrong direction." He absorbed that. "Then you were not afraid?" "No. Not of us, not of the censure, not of the public perception. We understood that short-term perception was a cost we could afford to pay," I said. "Long-term position was what mattered. We chose to spend reputation to buy time and space. It was a deliberate trade." Ithari looked at the table for a long moment. When he looked up, his expression had settled into something that I recognized, having seen it on many faces in many difficult conversations. The particular stillness of a person who has just accepted something they would have preferred to argue against. "The Council will want to recalibrate its assessment of humanity," he said. "I expect so. That process will take time. There will be political complications on our side." "There always are," I said. "Take the time you need. We are patient people." Something crossed his face that might, under other circumstances, have been a smile. The meeting ended after another 20 minutes of careful, specific conversation about the corridor's future status, Vreth commercial transit rights, human monitoring presence, the formal terms of the situation's resolution. It was detailed, technical, and entirely civil. When Ithari left, I sat in the consultation room alone for a few minutes and thought about the distance between who he had been in those early sessions, the performance, the mockery, the careful theater of contempt, and who he was in private when the stakes were real and the room was empty. People are almost always more complicated in person than they are from a podium. That is something this work teaches you quickly. I thought about Nora Ellis. She had been formally reassigned to the new Vreth Human Diplomatic Liaison Office that the Council had quietly established in the weeks following the corridor incident, a small but symbolically significant body tasked with normalizing communication between our two missions. On her last day in her old role, she had come to my office. Not officially. Just a knock on the door, an offered hand, and a small data chip. "Vreth Cultural Archive," she said. "The section on species of note. I thought you might want to see the updated entry." I took the chip. I looked at it. I set it on my desk without inserting it into the reader. She watched me. "You're not going to read it." "Not today," I said. "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because whatever it says now, I finally said. "It was written in response to something we did, and I am more interested in what we do next than in being documented for what we did before." I picked it up and held it out to her. "You keep it. Read it to me someday when we have known each other long enough for it to be funny." She took it. She held it for a moment with an expression I still carry 3 months later. In the way you carry the things that stay with you because they are true, a kind of quiet recognition, one careful person to another, that something had changed in the space between them. She left. I heard her footsteps in the corridor for a moment, and then they faded. That night I walked the long outer ring of asteroid Primus alone. It was a habit I had developed over 11 years, a late walk through the quieter corridors after sessions ended, when the delegations had gone to their quarters, and the only presences left were the maintenance staff and the station's endless mechanical breathing. The outer ring had a series of wide viewports, longer and broader than the ones elsewhere, looking out over the asteroid's slow rotation into clean, open space. I stopped at the longest viewport and stood there for a while. I thought about a place called the Siege of Callisto, which was a thing that happened 30 years ago, and which most people alive have either forgotten or never knew. I was 26 years old, newly promoted, assigned to a rearguard unit whose specific job was to hold a position that everyone, including our own command, expected to fall. The outer collective had 3 times our tonnage and twice our numbers. We held for 11 days before our main force completed the repositioning maneuver that allowed us to close their supply lines. 11 days. Every one of them had felt like the last. But they were not the last. I have thought about those 11 days many times during the years since, not with the bitterness that war sometimes leaves, with something closer to understanding. Because those 11 days taught me something that I have never forgotten and that I tried, in the ways available to me across an 11-year diplomatic career, to embody in every decision I made and every silence I kept. The thing that fear and patience look like from the outside is the same. They wear the same face. They move the same way. The difference is entirely internal. It lives in what you know and how far ahead you are willing to look. A person who holds still because they are afraid and a person who holds still because they are waiting can occupy the exact same room and appear completely identical to every observer present. The difference only becomes visible when the waiting ends. Humanity had been waiting for a long time, not just in the Kepler corridor, not just across the 18 months of careful preparation that the Council would spend years analyzing. I mean something longer than that, a kind of patience built into us by everything that had ever required us to survive. Ice and drought and plague and our own worst impulses, and the long, grinding process of becoming something better than we had been before. We had outlasted most things through a combination of stubbornness and intelligence, and a very specific refusal to accept that the current situation was the permanent situation. The galaxy had looked at us and seen the size of our ships and the range of our territory and the smoothness of our diplomatic language, and it had made a category error. It had assumed that because we had achieved a certain level of sophistication, we had left behind the deeper qualities that produced the sophistication in the first place. We had not. The next morning I arrived at the Grand Conclave Chamber for a regular session. No emergency, no crisis, no major agenda item. Owen was already at the table, looking through the day's briefing materials with his second coffee at the ready. I crossed the floor toward the human delegation's position. And I stopped. The chair was different. It was not the narrow, pale structure that had occupied this position for as long as I could remember. That chair was gone. In its place stood something solid, wide, and carved, not from the composite materials of standard council furniture but from lunar stone, white-gray and dense, with a surface that caught the light evenly across its entire face. It had no decoration. It needed none. Its presence was the statement. It was positioned at the front of the chamber. Center front. Not near the back. not in a quiet corner of the horseshoe where the smaller delegations set their representatives. The center front position was traditionally reserved for the council's most senior recognized members, the species with the longest unbroken diplomatic histories, the most extensive formal agreements, the greatest established presence in galactic affairs. There was no note, no formal notification, no document or communiqué explaining the change. Someone, or the council itself, through whatever quiet process it used when it wanted to acknowledge something without making a speech about it, had simply moved the chair. I stood in front of it for a moment. Owen came to stand beside me. He looked at the chair, he looked at me. He said very quietly, "Well." "Yes," I said. "How does it feel?" I thought about that. The honest answer was complicated. It felt like the end of something, but not the triumphant kind of end, the clean slate kind. It felt like the closing of one chapter of a very long book, with the full knowledge that the next chapter was already beginning and would bring its own difficulties, its own tests, its own long silences during which we would have to know something the room did not. It felt like responsibility in the most direct sense of the word. Not a burden and not a reward, but simply a fact, a weight distributed evenly across the shoulders in the way that important things always are. It felt, if I am being fully honest, like standing at the edge of the next 11 days. I sat down. The chair was steady under me, solid as the rock it was made from. I set my briefing materials on the table. I looked out at the chamber, at the other delegations taking their seats, at the observation galleries filling with staff, at the enormous curved walls of the conclave that had held the conversations of 47 species for centuries. First speaker Orvin took his position. He called the session to order. The room settled into the particular, focused quiet of a body preparing to conduct the serious business of governing a shared galaxy. Owen leaned slightly toward me. "Ready?" he asked. I opened the briefing document. I found the first agenda item. "We're always ready," I said. "That's the whole point." The session began.